Welcome to the Empowering Women podcast. Together, we will hear from ambitious and inspiring career women as they share their stories of success and overcoming career challenges. And now, your host, Mel the Engineer.
Welcome to the Empowering Women podcast. I'm your host, Mel the Engineer, and I'm excited because we have a great interview lined up for you today with Drena Howard. More on her bio in a moment. First, I want to share a recent review from iTunes. The Boss Lady number 11 writes, quote, "This is the perfect podcast to listen to on my drive to work. It gives me hope and encouragement on how to succeed as a professional woman. Thanks, Mel." And thank you, Boss Lady. You rock. We love to read your reviews, so please don't be shy about getting in touch with us and leaving reviews on iTunes or Spotify. Next, I want to remind you that registration for the Empowering Women in Industry Conference happening September 26, 2019 in Chicago is open. The conference is going to cover topics like change intelligence, mentoring, overcoming limiting beliefs, and personal branding. It's a day full of leaders eager to help you catapult to the next level in your career. And of course, there will be an awards and gala dinner that night. You won't want to miss it. You can find details about the schedule, the location, and logistics at empoweringwomeninindustry.com. That's empoweringwomeninindustry.com. Okay, so let's get to today's episode. Our guest is Drena Howard. Drena is a senior leader in the EHS space, and that stands for Environmental Health and Safety. This is a fascinating and critical area that we often don't hear a lot about until something goes wrong. Much like remediation, it can be one of those hidden careers. But also like remediation, it can be an extremely fulfilling avenue in STEM to take. So Drena Howard is a senior environmental health, safety, and sustainability professional with 15 years of experience in retail, manufacturing, and warehouses. And this spans industries from cosmetics to building system services and aerospace. Drena holds a Bachelor of Science in Biology from South Carolina State University, which is an important historically Black university, or HBCU. And Drena also holds a Master's of Environmental Management and a Master of Public Health, both from Yale University. Drena is recognized as a leader in EHS, as showcased by her roles with the National Association of Environmental Managers, where she is currently on the board of directors. So without further ado, I'd like to bring you Drena Howard. Drena, thank you so much for joining me today on the Empowering Women podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Absolutely. So let's start off. If you could tell us a bit about your early education and career. How did you end up at Yale, and why did you decide to pursue forestry and environmental studies there?
Oh, yeah, that's a pretty long question, but I will break it down. So I started with my undergraduate degree at South Carolina State University. South Carolina State is the only historically Black college and university that is state supported in South Carolina. And I really wanted to go to an HBCU, and I picked that particular school because they were starting an environmental science program there. And one of the professors, Dr. Ambrose Anuro, reached out to me during my application saying, we would really like to have you join. I know that you have biology listed as a potential major, but I think you would really enjoy environmental science. And we've got this new program and project started. So I attended South Carolina State and worked directly under Dr. Anuro for my 4 years that I was there. Dr. Onuro graduated from Yale School of Forestry. He got his PhD there, and he shared with me saying that if I really wanted to continue in environmental studies, then I should look to go to Yale School of Forestry. It's the oldest and best environmental school, and I went there, and you should go there too, because I didn't even think of an Ivy League school or going to Yale. While I was in graduate school, I was just kind of trying to put one foot in front of the other. But when he offered that as a suggestion or even a consideration, it opened up my eyes, and I said, you know what, that might be possible. Why, if he believes that I could go to Yale, why don't I believe that I can go to Yale? So through his mentorship, his sponsorship, because he still had connections at Yale, he really helped to groom me to be prepared to sit for my exams and go into the School of Forestry and, prepare my application. I had a lot of amazing people during undergrad to pour into me and help coach and guide me. And through that process, I had a successful application, and that is what brought me to Yale School of Forestry.
That is awesome. Okay, so when you say he groomed you, what did that look like? What types of things did he maybe coach you through?
So a lot of the time that I was working with Dr. Onuro was really about my education. So I spent a lot of time studying. I spent a lot of time, making slides and doing a lot of laboratory work for him to kind of prepare me to go to continuing education. And he also really coached me on what an application to Yale University would look like. So, really bridging the gap from my education at a HBCU that may not be as known as some of the other major colleges, and how to differentiate my application for Yale University, just to kind of bridge that gap, because it isn't a very well-known school outside of, people who may live in the area or may be familiar with the conference that school is in. So really helping to broaden my expectations and broaden my writing abilities to make that transition from undergrad to graduate school.
So I'd like to ask you, what did it mean to you to attend an HBCU school?
So I only applied to HBCUs. I had everything that I needed going out of high school to attend any university. I had the minimum requirements, but I was really passionate about going to an HBCU in particular, that I only applied to HBCUs. Everyone that I knew in my family went to HBCUs. And partially that's because at some point in time, that's where certain members of my family, they could only go to HBCU. So in my mind, that's where I wanted to go. I grew up during Different World, which I watched on TV, and I was like, I really want to get the HBCU experience. And so I intentionally applied and went to an HBCU. And I loved the experience. I loved the nurturing. I loved not being the only Black person anywhere, because since I've left South Carolina State, it's been many cases that I have been the only person of color in a room, and it was really great to have those 4 years where that wasn't the case. So I'm extremely glad that I went, and that's some of the decision making in why I attended an HBCU.
Thank you for sharing that. I'd like to circle back to what you're talking about before we do, though, these spots in your career that you're describing. I was wondering, did you go straight from the environmental studies to a master's in public health, and how did you decide on public health?
So while I was at Yale, so the degree program that I matriculated into was a master's of environmental management. And there was one particular course that I took, which was called Industrial Ecology. The professor was Tom Gradle. And what we did was we went to visit manufacturing locations to kind of understand the environmental process that a company goes through to make their products. So we could look at the waste, the energy, the environmental impact, the what's going out of the manufacturing facility, what's going in, kind of like the life cycle of a product within a manufacturing and location. And some of the people who came and interviewed with us or were sharing the plant were environmental health and safety professionals. So they would walk through, talk about the environmental impacts, but also share points about environmental exposure and environmental health. And when I was initially looking at going into environmental studies, one thing that I was kind of toggling with was environmental justice and environmental health. And so I wanted to impact the air that people were breathing and the food that people were eating from different pollutants. And by taking that class, I said, oh, maybe you can do it from inside an industry instead of working from the outside in. And so during those tours and meeting these environmental health and safety professionals, I learned more about them not only doing environmental work, but also doing health and safety work. And so when I finished that class, I said, this health and safety stuff is really cool. How can I study more? So while I was at Yale during my second semester, I took an industrial hygiene course at the public health school. And it opened my eyes, and I said, I need a little bit more of this. So while I was still taking classes for the School of Forestry, I applied to the public health school and got accepted and did a dual program, environmental management and public health.
Nice. Okay, that's very cool. So tell us about your first EHS position. What were those initial experiences like?
My first EHS position, I worked for United Technologies in one of their business units called Pratt & Whitney. I worked particularly in the CAM unit, which stands for combustors, augmenters, and nozzles. So that is the back end of the engine that kind of helps direct the plane. And so they were manufacturing these combustors, augmenters, and nozzles. And I got hired in kind of as an ergonomics engineer. So my focus was to make sure that while the employees were manufacturing the elements of this aircraft engine, they weren't getting ergonomic related injuries, strains, sprains, repetitive motions, etc. So the workforce was unionized. It was predominantly male. It was in Connecticut, so predominantly white there, but mostly male. And my whole team was male. And there were a few females who worked on the shop floor and female admins as well, but majority male environment. So when I first started, I started out on the floor with my steel-toed shoes on, working with the union employees, addressing their concerns around environmental, first health and safety issues, and then we started adding more environmental responsibilities to my role.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so how did your career progress from there?
So after working at Pratt & Whitney, I was there for maybe a year to a year and a half. I got into a rotational leadership program that they had with United Technologies in environmental health and safety. And I was able to tour and work at a few of the different business units at UTC. So I was able to do a stint in the carrier air conditioning unit division. I did a stint at the corporate offices, and I did a stint at UTC Fire and Security. And this is the part of the business that did building security services as well as fire suppression systems. So I spent maybe about 2 years or so sprinkling around at the different business units before I landed a permanent position at UTC Fire and Security.
You're listening to the Empowering Women podcast. Our guest on episode 7 is Drena Howard, an expert in the field of environmental health and safety. You can listen to this episode again and other episodes of the Empowering Women podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. So, throughout your career, have you had any mentors or sponsors that really influenced your path?
Yes. Well, first of all, I had Dr. Neuro from South Carolina State, but more so professionally. So I've had three women in particular who have influenced my career path. One who really helped open up my eyes to auditing and really honing my skills in auditing to allow me to progress in different career paths around environmental health and safety auditing. I had another mentor who could help really guide me around office politics and dynamics. And then a third mentor that I can think of who's been really instrumental in me taking on projects and making strategic moves in my career, whether it be company or business unit, to kind of help round me out as an EH&S professional.
Do you have any thoughts for other women who are looking to progress in their career on cultivating those types of relationships?
So, my advice to women on cultivating mentorship or sponsorship relationships is really to make sure you're cultivating the relationship as a whole. The whole cold call of, would you be my mentor, doesn't always work, and it really is about establishing the relationship first. Mentors can be across the board anywhere. Mentors don't have to work with you. They can work in a different organization, different career path, etc. Sponsors are a little bit more targeted and selected. And I would just really encourage women as it relates to sponsorship to be strategic in establishing that relationship and also really being intentional about asking for sponsorship so that your name is brought up in the spaces that you won't be sitting, so that that person can remember your work, that person can remember your interest and your passions, and that person can speak on your behalf when you're not in the room. And that requires, like I said, deep relationship as well as ensuring that you're being intentional and open and sharing what it is that you want to do next, so that person knows where they can put your name when new projects arrive.
That's a really great way to articulate it. Thank you. My next question is just, what do you love most about working in EHS?
Oh, wow. There's two things that I really, really like about working in EHS. One is employee health and safety. I like to ensure people don't get injured at work so they can do what it is that they love to do for the company as well as in their personal life. I have worked in more hazardous industries when I was with United Technologies, and serious injuries can completely alter a person's life, a family's life, and being able to prevent something like that from happening to someone so that they can still have their limbs, their mobilities, and can provide for themselves and their family, as well as do the things they love to do on the weekends, makes my day. The other thing that I really like about being an EH&S is the environmental impact and making sure that I feel that I have a contribution that I can make to some of the big challenges that we are facing around climate change and other bigger impacts. Just knowing that if I do something small or can influence something small within an organization, it can have a really big impact on overall environmental opportunities for the community and, I guess the world as a whole, if we wanted to think about it globally, since, I work for a global company. So, the environmental initiatives that we do, combined with all of the other companies and their different environmental issues, can make a difference. And I'm excited to work on projects that do that.
We haven't gotten to where you're currently at today, so maybe let's go there for a moment. You've really progressed as a leader in this space. I mean, you've been able to climb the ladder, so to speak. Would you tell us your current role and what your primary responsibilities are today?
Sure. So my current role is I am the director of Global Environmental Affairs and Safety for the retail channel at the Estee Lauder companies. So I'm responsible for the freestanding stores. So if you go into a mall and you see a Mac or an Aveda store, those brands are underneath the ELC portfolio. I'm responsible for the health, safety, and environmental impacts from those freestanding stores, as well as the counter locations. If you were to go to a Macy's and you see a Clinique and a La Mer, those counters, I'm responsible more so for health and safety, but sometimes environmental initiatives there globally. So the same type of operations that we do in North America, I have responsibility for those projects and programs globally, myself and my team.
What would you say is a challenge that you face as an EHS leader?
I think one of the biggest challenge as an EHS leader is that you are an influencer. You're usually an internal consultant, if you will. So the different projects that you're doing to impact worker health and safety, the different programs that you may be working on to impact environmental compliance or sustainability initiatives are typically done through influence. Also working for a department that is a cost avoidance department. So we aren't in a department that generates revenue for the company. We either save money, whether it's through environmental programs or through not getting fined. Sometimes it's hard to push initiatives through when you are not a income generating department in an organization. So some of those challenges of having to influence and also possibly influence without funding can be a bit challenging to really execute. And since, there's a lot of additional focus on corporate responsibility, and environmental health and safety falls underneath the bigger umbrella of corporate responsibility, sometimes it gets really challenging in, trying to meet the different targets and objectives because you're dealing with behaviors of people and the behaviors that people need to do to, not slip and fall or use a ladder safely, as well as ensure that you are putting the right trash in the right bucket so that it can be properly recycled or compost. I think those are a few different challenges that I continually face in my role.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point about, the EHS department it's not the money-making side of the business, and yet it's such an important part of it. But I suspect that part of your challenge is maybe communicating with people who don't see the value in what you and your team are doing.
You are absolutely right. Sometimes the value isn't seen until you can point to another company that has had XYZ fines and say, look, this is why we're doing this, so that we're not losing brand equity on a reputation boo-boo, if you will.
Yeah.
So sometimes we have to leverage those learnings, and then also the opportunity to stay in the competitive game. We know for talent attraction that new talent is looking for sustainable and thoughtful organizations. So that's another opportunity to show value with the EH&S profession. It's not always easy because you don't have the dollars to dollars. It's always like, we potentially saved this much, or we potentially avoided these many fines. We reduced this amount in workers' compensation, but it's not ever, we brought in this much money.
Right.
You're listening to the Empowering Women podcast.
From what I've seen, and do correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I've seen, public health as a subject has lots of women in it. But you went into the EHS space and you worked for companies that I would suspect would be almost entirely male-dominated. So you mentioned UTC, Pratt & Whitney, General Electric, Shell. Did you have any experiences as a woman or a woman of color in these spaces that you would like to share?
When I first started in my career, being many times the youngest, being many times the only woman and the only person of color, there were some frustrations. Initially, a lot of people just thought I was a short-term intern. And so getting over that hump took some time. No, I really work here. I'm here and I'm telling you what I need you to do. That took, some learning, some communication skills, some finessing to, start to broker those relationships and get the credibility that I needed. And when I got pushback, there were so many different things that went through my mind. Do they think I'm too young? Do they not want to listen to me because I'm a woman? Or do they not want to listen to me because I'm Black? I feel that this is all solid, what I'm saying, what I need them to do. It makes sense. We've run this through up and down the gamut. This is a solid plan. What is causing this pushback? So getting over those hurdles of the different internal, what's the problem? Is it me? Is it me because of 1, 2, or 3, or all 3? Was definitely a challenge that I had to grow out of during my first few years of working.
Do you have any thoughts that you would like to share based on your experiences about how the people around you, men or women, could do a better job of being an ally to people of color in the professional space?
Well, I think one opportunity for people to be allies is to really listen and to make sure that they are hearing from their colleague what they need. Because every person in every industry is going to need something different to help them navigate or help support whatever the microaggressions, whatever the challenges that they may be facing. And to really listen to understand is the best way to be an ally. And you don't necessarily have to advocate or speak up or do certain things that it feels like you may need to do, because that may put the person in another tricky position. But if you listen and the person who is feeling marginalized in some kind of way at work can express an opportunity that you could be an ally or someone could be an ally, I would say just listen to that person and try to execute their request, because it will be different across any industry and different work cultures.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What changes would you like to see in the EHS space, particularly when you think about the need to ensure a robust pipeline of passionate candidates into the future?
So a few things that I would like to see. I would like to see companies expand where they recruit talent from schools. A lot of times there are the same schools that are being recruited from different companies. They have kind of like their targeted pipeline of success. So I would definitely encourage recruiting offices to expand their search beyond the current colleges pools that they go to. I would always encourage companies to step into the space of recruiting from HBCUs, step into the space of recruiting from schools that are not the top 10 schools, because you could very well be missing out on passionate talent, because some people just may not know about the profession, but can easily be molded and leverage the skill set that they completed in their undergraduate school to easily support your different environmental health and safety programs. So expanding recruitment is one opportunity. The other thing that I would like to see change is I believe that there are a lot more people of color and women in the environmental health and safety profession, but they're not always represented in larger conferences or trade events and trade shows. So I would encourage organizations, if you have up and coming talent, whether they be women, people of color, LGBTQA, etc., that instead of always sending just your most senior people to the conference, send some of your more junior people, send some of your more diverse candidates to these conferences, to these trade shows, because it shows representation of your organization, as well as it is a way to groom and develop your talent through their exposure, the things that they learn from the conference. And you're not only sending your, most senior person that may be a more standard white male demographic. So those two things, recruiting and exposure, are two opportunities that I would like to see change within the profession.
What is important to you about environmental health and perhaps environmental justice?
I think the old edict of health is wealth is really important. I feel that as we struggle with climate change and policy around climate change, and we know that marginalized communities are usually more impacted by different environmental exposures, which then impacts them from, school age on, where they are constantly behind the gap, if you will. They're constantly behind the race to keep up, is a really great opportunity for organizations and companies to support environmental justice issues, environmental health and safety issues. So I'm personally passionate about environmental justice, because as we tackle big challenges such as climate change, we know that the countries that are going to be most impacted are smaller, developing countries. When we know manufacturing locations are selecting places that they are building a new, manufacturing location, where they're usually the most toxin, are sometimes in marginalized communities. So I'm passionate about opportunities in environmental justice, because if you can improve the health and quality of air, quality of water in these communities, it gives more people an opportunity to continue to go on to advanced education, because they're not sick and missing school. And if they're not sick and missing school, then, they have more job opportunities. So it creates a stronger pipeline for the future as a whole. So environmental justice is not just limited to, not in my backyard. It's what are some of those opportunities to improve the air, the water, the basic things that people need to function and live, which then opens up so many more pathways for success.
That's really fascinating. While you were describing that, it made me think about we live in the United States, and we get all of these products manufactured elsewhere that are, brought onto a shelf somewhere that we can pick up and take home. And it's easy to not think about, where did this come from and how could it have impacted another community?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We do have privilege in the United States around different things that we pick up and use. And, there is still a responsibility that we have as a privileged nation to be mindful of our impact and our footprint.
Absolutely. What do you enjoy most about working for Estee Lauder?
The thing that I enjoy most about working for the Estee Lauder companies is my team. I think I work for one of the best departments ever. And a lot of times people leave companies because of the people, not so much because of the work. And I've been really fortunate to love what I do within the EH&S profession and do it with a group of people that are passionate about it, that we're not fighting each other because we're all working towards a common goal, and everyone is, putting in the work, thinking big, thinking bold, and showing up every day, really ready to just tackle the challenges. And that's so much fun.
As a leader of people now, what do you think are the most important things that you do to move the ball forward, to get your team motivated and getting everybody moving towards common goals?
Mm. Well, I try to keep the big picture in mind with my team around the strategy of being inclusive when we set the strategy, that we're all kind of agreeing this is the direction that we need to go in, breaking out individual goals that tie back into the strategy, and holding the team accountable to the deadlines that they set. And also making sure that members of my team are working on projects that they are personally passionate about. So, with environmental health and safety, you have environmental, you've got the health, you've got the safety, and there's a lot of different fractions between that people can specialize and focus in. So if somebody's really interested in industrial hygiene, there's an opportunity to explore that space deeper. If someone's interested in recycling or sustainability initiatives, they can dig in and explore those issues much more deeply. So I try to make sure that people are able to work in a space that they're passionate about, but also offer some opportunities for growth so that they stay a well-rounded EH&S professional and get to touch on all elements of environmental health and safety. So I think strategy focus and passion as well as stretching are things that I leverage to cultivate my team for growth and meeting our targets.
Drena, have you encountered any specific situation or incident that was difficult to overcome, something as a woman or as a woman of color in your career that you could share with us?
So one instance that I can share of really me personally trying to overcome some challenges of being a woman and a woman of color is when I started to become a lead auditor. And when you're a lead auditor, you are responsible for a team of people who are auditing, as well as you are the primary point person that is talking with the senior leadership of the site that you are responsible for. And I experienced some of these challenges more so internationally, sometimes in the US, but when I would travel to different countries in particular, I would find that, being a woman and a woman of color in such a role of authority was a challenge. So what I did to overcome that is I started making sure that I was aware of the cultural nuances of the different countries that I was going to assess. And I also tried to make sure up front I clarify that I was the lead auditor. And I did have some instances where another colleague of mine who was an older white guy, the lead auditor, the plant manager kept addressing questions to him, and it was my responsibility to answer. So I know that you asked me earlier about ally, and just to come back to that, one thing that I felt that this colleague did that really stood in as an ally is that he ensured that the plant manager knew that I was the lead auditor. So instead of answering the questions, which he, of course, was capable and knowledge to answer, he deferred to me to ensure that it would set the tone that I was the lead auditor and responsible for addressing those questions. So ways that I prepared, again, just making sure of understanding the cultural nuances of the country that I was going into, really asserting myself as the leader, and in that one instance, having an ally to support me in being a lead auditor are some examples of where I felt as a woman and a woman of color, it was challenging to execute my role.
Along your career path, and how long have you been in EHS now?
Almost 14 years.
14 years. That's a good deal of time. So along your 14 years, what are some of the things that you have learned that you feel have helped you grow as a leader?
So the lessons I would say that I have learned that have helped me to be successful as a leader is to continuously learn about the EH&S profession. There's so many different caveats to it that being a little bit knowledgeable about everything is beneficial. So no matter what the profession is, continuous learning is important. The other lesson is communicating, storytelling, and people's behavior. That's kind of all three in one. Is that no matter what role or what you're doing, your communication style is key. Being able to talk to people, being able to understand people, being able to influence them, and no matter your role, but in my role in particular, I'm constantly trying to influence and persuade behavior. So listening and understanding people's pain points and resistance and negotiating with them on opportunities to work around that has been another lesson. And I would think the third lesson that has helped me really grow, and this has just come from growth, is trusting my voice and trusting my opinion and knowing that my opinion has value. Knowing my opinion has a lot of weight and not downplaying or playing small with my ideas and my opinions, not being afraid to put out a bold objective, not being afraid to challenge my colleagues to push forward with bold ideas, are all, I think, would be the top three lessons that I have learned over my 14 or so years in the profession.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. So we are at the end, and I'd just like to kind of open the floor and ask, what advice would you perhaps like to share to women who would like to follow a path similar to yours? And in particular, I'm thinking about working your way up in leadership in corporate America.
So the advice that I would give to women is to not be afraid to make the leap in your career trajectory. Environmental affairs and safety in particular, there's not really one set path. If you talk to an EHS professional, you would get so many different stories on how they got into the profession and the different roles that they took. So there's not really a one size fits all, or if you do this, then you will wind up in this role. So what I would encourage everyone to do is to make sure that you are asking questions, learning about the opportunities, and the opportunities could be the challenges, like what is an opportunity that can solve a problem within the organization, presenting an idea and being bold enough to apply for the role or create the role, work with an organization to create the role. That doesn't always happen in every space, but it has happened and it can happen. So being bold enough to at least ask the question. One thing my mom always said is you never know unless you ask. So I would always encourage people to ask for what you want. Ask about the opportunities that are available, because if you don't ask, you won't know.
That's great advice. Thank you so much, Drena. It's been a pleasure having you on the Empowering Women podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me and for sticking around for the entire episode. I've been thinking about this conversation ever since Drena and I recorded it, and I wanted to speak with you about a part of it. I was recently on the other side of an interview. I was interviewed by the Water Environment Federation, or WEF, for their podcast called Words on Water. Specifically, I was asked to come on the show and talk about the state of women in water. At one point, the interviewer asked me what men in the water field could do to be better allies to women. I think this is a really important question to ask. For those of us who have privilege, I think it's important for us to research and listen when people share their experiences and are willing to share with us how to be good allies. But at the same time, I found myself struggling with responding to it. One thing that I didn't get the chance to articulate then was that I can't speak for all women. I can mostly speak to my own experience and maybe a bit to the experiences that I have witnessed others having. But the other thing I wanted to point out here is that not everyone wants to talk about this, and it's important to consider before asking, say, a colleague questions that might make them uncomfortable. There are many resources online about allyship, whether the population we're discussing is women, people of color, minorities, LGBTQ, or differently abled. So we would encourage you to do some digging on your own to educate yourself about what privilege and allyship mean and what it can mean for you to engage in a meaningful way as an ally. Okay, so our last announcements. Again, I want to share that registration for the Empowering Women in Industry Conference happening September 26th, 2019 in Chicago is open. There is a great lineup of powerhouse women leaders speaking at the event, so you won't want to miss it. Head over to empoweringwomeninindustry.com for more details. Our next episode will feature Miss Ingrid Lindberg. Ingrid is the first person to ever hold the title of Chief Customer Experience Officer, or CXO. She's going to share amazing stories and advice for success in corporate America. So that is an excellent episode coming up. Thank you again for joining me today. If you are finding the Empowering Women podcast helpful or useful, please consider sharing it with a friend and leaving us a kind review wherever you download your podcasts. This helps others find the show so that it can be successful and we can keep making useful free content for you. Let's not forget that there is a lot of free media out there, and maybe some of it's not so great, but we do our best to make this show a great product for you, and we want to continue publishing this free content for you. So please take a moment and share with a friend, share on social media, and leave us a review. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, and I can't wait to share Ingrid's interview with you on episode 8. And don't forget, you can always get in touch with me. I'm on Twitter and Facebook as Mel the Engineer. And you can also get me at meltheengineer@gmail.com. Ta-ta for now, ladies.
Thank you for joining us for an episode of the Empowering Women podcast with Mel the Engineer. If you find the Empowering Women podcast helpful, please consider leaving a review on iTunes or wherever you download your podcasts. Our show is a partnership between Mel the Engineer and the Empowering Women in Industry organization. Learn more by visiting empoweringwomenpodcast.com.